Welcome back to the Innovative Agency, everybody. Sharon Torek here with you again with a conversation that I think will be very helpful to those of you as you are really making that push towards year end. As we're sitting here about to have this discussion with my guest, it is almost September 2024, and we're headed towards what's, in my experience, working with agencies over the years, a very busy season, kind of making that push to year end, both revenue wise, productivity wise. And a lot of that involves conversations with clients and with prospects. And um, I want to welcome today's guest to the show to talk about those conversations and the expectations that we set when we're in the midst of either doing new business or in serving the clients that we already have. And so, Doug Bradley, welcome. Doug is the founder and CEO of Everest Legal Marketing, and you've certainly worked with a lot of the companies that I recognize as the owner of a law firm, and now you're an entrepreneur yourself, and you own your own agency focused on law firms and their digital properties. And welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation. First of all, that's the
Thank
most
you so
important
much
thing.
for having me on, Sharon. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I'm glad we got an opportunity to connect.
me too. Me too. So, you and I were just talking briefly before we started recording this conversation for the show, and I mentioned to you that I appreciate that you've got good, strong points of view on how to talk to clients about two really important things. The first is, why do our services cost what they cost? And I think this is an important conversation because clients don't know what they don't know about how to determine what a fair price to pay, especially for digital marketing. And in my experience working with agencies over the years, digital work is the most reviled by potential clients because they don't understand it. Digital agencies get the worst rap because there's never a clear understanding, it seems like. There's a lot of churn because clients get quickly disenchanted because they don't understand what they're buying or what a fair cost for it is, or a fair timeline. And so you put out some great content about how to talk to your clients about why it costs what it costs and why it takes the amount of time that it takes. And I would really love to get your pearls of wisdom for the other agency owners listening to this today about why, first of all, why you thought that was an important thing to opine about, and your point of view and how you handle these conversations with your clients. So, first of all, what made you decide to sort of tackle these topics on your own?
Yeah, Sharon, it's there are two very common questions that come up when working with law firms, and especially when working with firms who either they haven't done a whole lot of SEO and marketing, for their website, they're brand new to it. You know, the, Many people think of advertising as you run an ad and you start getting leads and you filter the leads. And with SEO specifically, you start doing SEO, and there's definitely a ramp up period, and sometimes it's a combination of not setting the right expectations, or if you do that, expectations are too high anyway, or they're so out in left field that it's hard to control those expectations. But after talking with so many different lawyers, those seem to be two things that always just come up constantly: is how long does this take, and or why is it taking so long, and why does this cost so much? Because we get varying degrees. Law firms, they get, I'll do it for you for $300 a month, all the way up to it's going to cost you $10,000 a month. And
Mhm.
so it's very difficult to discern how much something costs, what's a fair price. Am I spending too much or am I spending too little? So that's why I specifically wrote these articles.
So I think that's a great tee off to my biggest question, which is, why do you think there is such a disconnect, especially in the digital marketing space? Your firm does a lot of SEO. I mean, you do surrounding services to SEO, but
Sure.
um, why do you think in the digital space in particular, there is such a disconnect between what the clients expect and what the agency actually does to set the engagement up for success. Why is there such a high dissatisfaction rate? Are agency leaders just too tentative about what they're willing to commit to? Is it that they're not asking enough questions about the customer's business goals? What do you think after doing this for so long?
Yeah, well, I can say, from my experience that um, sometimes when you have a prospect who's interested in buying your service, you might be really enthusiastic to get to that goal and set some other important elements aside, like what's your expectation of success? Do you look at traffic as a success indicator? Do you look at incoming leads? Do you look at conversions? Do you look at, signed retainers? Do you look at ROI? There's those elements that I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as well, we kind of set that aside for a moment because we want to get the signature, we want to get engaged, we want to get moving on the project. And so the expectations kind of sometimes take a side seat, and we might assume falsely that the lawyer or that the law firm, the people who are engaging us, already understand those things. And so when we're working with clients, I always try to be careful. Actually, I just had a meeting this morning with a client, brand new website, brand new URL, never done SEO before in her life, has been surviving off of referrals for the past 9 years.
Mm,
And I was very, very careful to set the expectation for the first 90 days as to what we were going to be doing, how we were going to be communicating, what's going to happen within that time frame, because I wanted her to feel comfort that her experience will be pretty normal for those first 90 days that we're up and running.
mhm.
But that's one of the main reasons I believe that law firms and lawyers individually might not always have a clear expectation of what um, is going to happen. And I think we need to paint with a more specific brush when we're outlining that to a client.
Okay, well, that's fair. I mean, and this could be any type of client. I mean, law firms happen to be the clients that you
Sure.
serve, but it could be plumbing
Sure.
companies or restaurants or, B2B businesses as well.
Yeah.
So, for the benefit of the agency owners and leaders who are listening, do you have, for lack of a better term, a formula or sort of an internalized checklist of how do you make sure that when you sit down with the prospect that you're asking the right questions. You are having the right conversation so that you can fairly set the basis for their expectations once you move forward and do business together. What is your process for how you have the conversation so that you're actually getting the information you need to fairly set the expectations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, kind of similar to the way that you were talking to me about how you handle podcasts and your interviews, is that it's a little bit unscripted, and kind of go off into different bunny trails, so to speak. Kind of similar with clients. The conversation evolves, but I always tend to ask, what is your definition of success? If I have a lot of clients who initially believe, if they haven't done SEO before, that if they get to page one of Google for some specific searches, they're going to just be bombarded with new leads, that it's just going to be overwhelming. And from my experience, that's not always necessarily true. There might be some truth to that, but just page one visibility isn't always necessarily going to be the thing that moves the needle in terms of revenue for the firm. Because there has to be an intake process, there has to be a vetting process for these potential new clients. Do they have a case? Do they not have a case? Is it the right case? Is it the wrong case? And so there's a little bit uh, involved in our conversation when I'm meeting with a prospect about who's intaking the lead, who's answering the questions, who's doing the initial consultation. These types of things. I'm trying to understand a little bit about the mechanisms internally within the firm about how they're going to get value out of what I offer. Because at the end of the
Got it.
day,
So you're learning their onboarding
a
process
little bit,
and
as much as I can, as much as
their
they're willing to
conversion
share.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I learned along the way that some law firms have really excellent intake processes, and then some I've learned after working with them for several months that their intake processes can definitely be improved. I have one law firm where they do the virtual consultation over Zoom with many clients, and they have a retainer ready for that client to sign at the end of the Zoom meeting if they're both on agreement as to what they're doing and how they're, and they basically have them DocuSign right there and guide them through the retainer while they're online with them. And guess what? they're they retain a lot more clients that way. It's no surprise because they're ready to go.
Right.
Whereas with clients who are, I'll call you tomorrow and we'll talk more about it, those are going to retain less.
Mhm. So what I'm extracting from that for agencies who serve maybe a different kind of audience than your agency does is asking a lot of questions or expressing a lot of curiosity when you're selling to these clients about what is your process going to be once we do what we do. In your case, it happens to be digital marketing or SEO. So
Right.
you're doing lead generation. In the case of a creative agency, it's developing maybe a new identity or a campaign. But it sounds to me like an important question for agencies to be asking, and check me if I'm wrong about this, is what are you going to do after we deliver the work you're engaging us to do? What's your expectation about once we get it to your door? Do you then need us to move it past your door for you or with you? Or do you have people internally to take the next steps? It sounds like that is a key thing to be asking in the business development phase of your relationship so that you know how to set their expectations about what you do, what you don't do, and what you're expecting them to do and not do. Do I have that
Sure.
right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's a certain part where, as a service provider, our job is to get, good traffic, good quality traffic to the landing pages that the law firm and I think are going to convert the best.
Mhm.
And that's our job. And so there's a little bit past that where it goes beyond that, where we might talk with them about it, but we can't be responsible for the intake process and the closing process of a new client. But I've definitely heard stories where clients will tell me, yeah, we're not getting, any good leads. And then we look at the actual Google Analytics and I say, well, we're looking at the analytics here and you had 300 visitors to this practice page or 200 visitors to this practice page over the last, 60, 90 days or whatever. And half of that traffic went to your contact page thereafter. And if, did they contact you? And they don't know. And how do you not know if they contacted you? You got to have some sort of a mechanism and answering the phone. And what are they saying? Are they saying things? Do they have a sales process? Because it's a sales process even still after they've made the phone call. So
Mhm.
we do have those conversations, but it's difficult. That line is a little blurry, at least with us, as to how far we go into their internal operations, to try and help them a bit more.
But it sounds to me like the more time an agency takes to understand that
Yeah,
on the client's behalf, the more reliable they're going to be at setting expectations for
sure.
success on the client side, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you, and I've had that, it's an uncomfortable conversation because I've had that conversation before with clients where, who's answering the phone? What do they sound like? What are they asking of? And if you have somebody who's a brute force phone answerer and, it's still a sales position, the person answering the phone, it might not be that in the job description, but that's the first person who a potential client interacts with. And if that person is not, driving the sales process through, no advertising is really going to be as effective as it could be.
Right. So I think, and I'd love to know your point of view on this. I think one part of the problem is that agencies are not digging deep enough to ask those questions before they even sell the work.
Sure. Yeah, and I
Um,
would say I'm guilty of that occasionally as well. Yes, I
well, I
agree.
mean, I think it's just an area we can all do better in, right?
Sure.
And in a practice area where there's so much churn,
Mhm.
digital especially, um, taking those extra steps in the beginning, it's got to be frustrating for the agency, right? Because you're slowing the sales process down.
Yeah,
You
that's it
are,
right there.
you
Yep.
know, you're doing a little of what has got to feel like unpaid consulting,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah.
But I wonder if just that needs to be part of the process and the methodology in order to ensure longer, happier, more lucrative relationships with the client. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And we're, we're dealing with a service that isn't inexpensive. And there's a lot of time and money and resources that go into getting that opportunity with a prospective client. And if it falls flat when the phone rings, that costs money. That opportunity just costs you money. And so, it can be hundreds of dollars for a qualified lead. Don't let them down when they actually pick up the phone and call. And
yeah.
like you said, yeah, we need to have that conversation more, and the more you can get out of that area of questioning and kind of discovery with the client, I think the more they'll realize that how important that piece of it is.
So, do you, as an agency owner, think that it's good to be armed with um, recommendations for additional help? Maybe areas where you don't practice, like, for example, sales training or intake training, or is it important to have those needs assessments done early, or do you what's your philosophy about that? Because some agencies are probably listening to this and thinking, look, we're not here to assess every
Right,
problem that
right.
that the client has in its organization. On the other hand, if fixing something you don't do can make what you do more successful for the client,
That's your
um,
gravy train. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah. So do
yeah,
you engage in that
I,
regularly as an agency?
we do definitely try to steer clients, especially if we see a potential hiccup down the road. Um, an old leader in an organization I used to work for is once said to me, "Be careful about calling the baby ugly."
All right. Well,
You
sure.
want to be careful on whose toes you're stepping on when you're identifying issues,
Yeah.
because you don't know if that's a leadership's family member. And
Yeah.
so it's always kind of careful navigating, and you certainly don't want to harm your relationship because you said, that person answers the phone terribly, and oh, that's my son, or whatever the case may be.
Well,
Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I definitely try to, if I see that a law firm needs a little help, either with um, kind of the sales process or after hours calls. What happens to after hours calls? We definitely have a bit of a roster of vendors that we might refer to for things that help with those situations. Um, and so, yeah, to answer your question, yes, I think um, we recommend as much as we can, but we also know what we're good at, and we don't try to dabble into things that we know we're not good at.
yeah. I think that's important, and it's got to be honest with yourselves about, where you shine
Yes.
and where you need a strategic partner to come in
Yep.
and help. You mentioned the cost of generating a lead as an example a moment ago, and that's a good segue to take a turn into the money
Yeah.
conversation.
Sure.
The way
Yeah.
you posited it, and a piece of content you wrote for your site was, why does this cost so much? The typical client question. Why is this so expensive? Why does this cost what it costs? And how to have that conversation as an agency owner or an agency leader with a potential client. So, what are your tips for the agency owners listening here about how to explain? And I know you have a specific set of explanations for your services, but how do you have that conversation and talk about with confidence
Yeah.
your fees with a prospective client so that they understand the value that they're getting and why the investment is what it is.
Yeah, and that I think that's also, I mean, kind of going back into, maybe sales training, and it's maybe one of those things I do unconsciously, but I always try to add value rather than um, consider it a cost, like this is a cost like toner is for your printer. This is one element that you invest into your business that will actually bring new clients to you.
Hmm.
New toner won't. A paralegal often won't. Coffee for the office won't. Not to say that those things aren't valuable and uh, certainly costs that need to be incurred, but the thing that drives people into your business is the thing that you want to invest in.
Hmm.
And there is a certain amount of skill and expertise that we offer that other agencies don't. And if a client has had that experience with another agency who said that they could and then they fell flat on their face, then the value should be very easy to prove. You if you didn't invest properly and it failed, that's because you hired the wrong talent group to
Yeah.
deliver what they're promising. And so for us, we fall back on, this is what we do for your industry specifically. And this is what we're experts at. We don't try to do things that we're not experts in. We do one thing and we do it well. If the problem is a nail, we're a hammer. That's it.
Hmm.
And if this doesn't fit, then we're probably not the right solution for you.
Hmm.
That's the approach that we take. And again, along with expectation setting, that's where we try to layer in, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is why you want to do it, and this is why it's an investment. You're hiring skilled experts at this who are really only good at this one thing, and that's what we do.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is this conversation is a lot easier to have if you're very focused as an agency. You've got a narrow lane of who you serve and how you serve them. And also what I'm hearing from you is just being very open about, um, and confident about the results that you help clients achieve. And I'm guessing kind of have the receipts to prove it, right? The case studies, the testimonials, the references, all those things so that, the potential client can sort of verify, what you're telling them about the experience of working with you.
Yeah, and it's always one of those difficult things. How do you, especially with lawyers, lawyers think everybody is a liar by nature.
All right, everybody. I happen to have a guest on the show today whose agency serves law firms, and let's just get it out there. I should have said it at the beginning of the time together. I'm sorry. On behalf of my profession, I am sorry. All right, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a stigma, I think, that marketers, kind of a self-inflicted wound. Um, I think we have to be very open and honest about what our capabilities are. And clients have been burned, lawyers have been burned, because many marketing agencies know that lawyers open their wallets for results. But if you just, if it's all sales pitch and all hype and then it falls flat on execution, how valuable is that to bring on a client and then 6 months later you have to offboard them? It's not a valuable client to me to have to onboard and offboard clients constantly. I
Mhm,
want a relationship with a client that's going to last a very long time, and that's most of our clientele.
mhm. Good. So the other, question that you addressed in some of your content was being ready to answer the client when they ask, "Why does this take as much time as it takes?
Yeah,
Why does it take this long? Why does it take that long? Why am I having to wait for the results for the amount of time it takes you to achieve them for me?" So, walk me through, actually walk our agency owners who are listening through, how do you effectively have that conversation? Because at this point, you've probably sold the client, you're probably engaged in service delivery, and they're wanting to know, when is this going to start turning into dollar signs for us as a business? So, how do you have the conversation up front about how long is this going to take? And then how do you, maintain the communication stream between agency and client about timing and, progress, etc., once you're engaged with them?
that's a really wonderful question. I'm glad you asked it. It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think if we as the agency owner or as the salesperson presenting the solution, if we've identified and that client's expectations, if we've talked with that client and we kind of identify a little bit about who that client is, we might have an answer that falls into the technical expectations or the technical reasons bucket. And then we have maybe identified that client as someone who kind of wants the non-technical reasons, like what's the highlights, give me the summary of why this takes so long. And I think knowing who that prospect is and their personality, that is going to lead you into one of those two approaches to the answer.
Mhm.
From a technical standpoint, I think any agency owner needs to be prepared to say, well, you have a brand new URL. We have to prove to Google that you are a credible, authoritative resource for these types of searches. And in order to do that, we need to build authority through proper link building on credible website. And you have the checklist of this is why this is going to take some time, is because
Mhm.
all of these technical reasons that we have to get through.
Mhm.
And similarly, if you're dealing with the person who wants the high level, like they don't care about the technical stuff, you have to know that they don't care about the technical stuff. They
Right.
care about the thing, like the actual answer to the question is different. And the answer is that we have to prove that you're the authoritative source of information to Google. And that takes time in order for us to build resources to layer into your campaign that paint that picture for Google. And that
Mhm.
comes with some technical things that we do. And so those two approaches to those two that answer is very different depending on the person who's asking the question. And that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think you have to, be a fast assessor. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds like is what you're saying
Know your
of
audience.
the degree, the depth of the information, that the client is actually expecting in their answer and meet them where they are.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, you know, I've gotta believe that for most clients, what they wanna know at the end of the day is how much money is this going to make me,
Mm-hmm.
AKA what's my ROI, and how long do you think it's gonna take to get us there?
Right.
So, I feel like if you gotta go in prepared to address those questions, or at least to tell the client, "We have an action plan for getting those answers to
Right.
you. It's
Right.
too early for us to know all of the answers. Here's what we know so far based on how we've assessed." And then wouldn't you say that after that, it's kinda just a matter of, um, engaging frequently with the
Yeah.
client? I know
Oh
from
yeah.
our experience serving our clients, which are agencies, even when we don't have an update for them or something in particular to tell them, reaching out to them to say, "Hey, we're still breathing over here. We know you're breathing over there. We haven't forgotten you. There's no news." Right? Yeah, or
Yeah.
something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if something, I work hand in hand with my project manager, and we're always talking about topics for clients, and we've really collaborated on, if something comes up in the news and it's newsworthy, which clients would this apply to? Is this a
Mhm,
topic for an article, or is this something we should make a point of in a future article? Like we're always trying to think about how to weave in elements into our clients' program for success.
mhm,
And constant communication is one of them. Um, Also, success, telling them here's what is going right, but also being transparent about what's going wrong.
mhm,
If there's a problem with it, I don't shy away from it. The client knows it's a competitive field. It may be a really competitive geography if you're in Chicago or Los Angeles or New York City. They know those things are going to take time, and it's better to not shove those under the carpet. It's better to say, look, we're still struggling with getting decent visibility and traffic on this page because of X, Y, and Z, and here's what we're doing.
mhm.
That's a better conversation to have than here's all of the successes and here's none of the opportunities.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it does all come down to, the theme that runs through all the great advice that you've given us so far is you've got to be willing to have the earnest and difficult conversations, even when you know you're not going to have great news for the client, or um, when you're not going to have enough information to keep the client satisfied. Being transparent about what you do know when you know it is super important to helping them understand why something takes as long as it takes. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
They they want to know why it's going to cost what it costs, then they wanna know why is it gonna take the amount of time that it takes, so
Yeah, yeah,
and
and I'm sorry to interrupt. I would say, like you had mentioned the phrase meeting the client where they're at.
yeah,
Every website is different. You know, the starting line is different for every client. So if it's a brand new client with a brand new URL that's never been indexed on Google before, that
mhm,
starting line is very different than the firm who's been doing active SEO for the last 5 years. Those
right.
starting lines are vastly different, and making sure that that client, whoever they are, knows, well, we're taking over a project that's never had an SEO effort before, and we have all of these things to do, or you have a great presence on these three things and we want to keep and maintain those things, but here's where you can also grow in these other areas. Maybe it's a different geography, maybe it's a whole new practice, but the starting line is going to be different.
So helpful. This has been a really great tour through how to tackle these two kind of tricky questions when agencies are doing business development or serving their client accounts, right? Because money and time are two things that every client, is extremely interested in maximizing when
Hand
they
in
engage
hand.
with an agency. So being ready to explain time and money to them is always important. And so, Doug, thank you so much for sharing some of your tips and your experiences with doing this in your own agency. If agency owners want to learn more about Everest marketing and how you handle SEO conversations, et cetera, where are some of the best places for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, for agency owners, you can get value from my blog on the Everest Legal Marketing website. We do some technical information on our articles. I write all of the articles on our website, but also I'm most active on Twitter, where kind of just presenting things in in the world of SEO specific to like the legal niche.
Got it. Okay. Well, Doug Bradley, Everest Legal Marketing, thank you so much for joining us today on
Thank you,
Innovative
Sharon.
Agency. This has been a really helpful conversation, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I appreciate the opportunity to be on.
It's my pleasure. All right, everybody, thank you to the rest of you for joining us. We will see you on the next episode. And until then, everybody stay well.